time you see a turtle up on top of a fence post, you know he had some help. I had come across this parable while I was in jail, but I never really knew what it meant. I would later find out Alex Haley, the author of Roots, had a picture of a turtle on a fence post hanging on his wall. When asked about it, he replied, "Every time I write something significant, every time I read my words and think that they are wonderful and begin to feel proud of myself, I look at the turtle on a fence post and remember that he didn't get there on his own. He had help." My name is Jody Borelli. I'm a recovering drug addict. My addiction began after a shoulder injury and pain medication prescribed by my doctor. I went from soccer mom and PTA president to heroin addict living on the streets of Tacoma and making an appearance on Washington's Most Wanted. Addiction stole the beautiful life I once had. Prior to my addiction, I was a stay-at-home mom, and this was my identity. My family was everything to me. My kids would come home to the smell of fresh-baked cookies. I was the neighborhood mom, too. My yard was the baseball field, the football field, and the basketball court, depending on the day. Safety was also a priority. This had earned me the reputation as a helmet enforcer. Every child in the neighborhood knew if they did not have on their helmet that their parents would be coming to retrieve their bikes. I was actively involved in every aspect of my children's lives, and my weekends often revolved around the sport of the season. My addiction began after I detached my labrum while coaching my son's Little League baseball team. I was prescribed medication by my doctor to treat the pain, and then my life was forever changed. The pills worked, but as I numbed the pain, I also numbed all the joy out of my life. Eventually, I couldn't tell the difference between joy and pain, and my life deteriorated rapidly. I didn't recognize addiction as it overtook me. I'd had multiple ER visits for stomach issues, which I now know to be withdrawal. I had my gallbladder removed for the love of surgery and the pain pills to follow. And I'd faked 3 different surgeries with the doctor that was prescribing me my pills. In 2009, I completed treatment at Residence 12 in Kirkland for a Vicodin addiction. My second attempt at treatment was at Sundown Ranch in 2012, and at this point, I had progressed to OxyContin. I had left treatment early, and 3 days later, I had a needle in my arm and a new love for heroin. Once my addiction had progressed to IV drug use, the shame was unbearable. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't allow my children to see me that way. They were everything to me, and I left them because of my addiction. Angelina, my baby, was 12, still clinging to my apron strings, and she was my little shadow. Joseph, 13, always my little protector, the one I'd coached for years in Little League baseball. Jaden was 17, old enough to understand, and the one who had always held out hope. The devastation that followed was horrific. Existing only to use, I lost myself in the grit of trap houses, stealing to support my habit, living in constant fear, and always on the run. I was the epitome of hopelessness. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. Suffering in ways beyond comprehension. Waking up, coming to, mad as hell that I even woke up because it meant that I had to endure the misery for yet another day. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. Many ask, how could this happen? No one chooses to be an addict, yet addiction is the disease of choice. The area of the brain responsible for decision-making is diseased. Nobody blames the Alzheimer's patient for forgetting their keys. So why do we blame the addict for making poor choices? The area of their brain responsible for decision-making is diseased. Looking back, the progression of my addiction was not gradual, and at no point was it ever manageable. For the first time, the needle hit my vein, The pendulum was in the pit, methodically cutting away at every part of me. Reduced down to the bare necessities, my life was consumed by the cycle of addiction. Life consisted of stealing and using to avoid being dope sick. The hurt was unbearable, but there was relief in the needle. There was relief in the needle, but the hurt was unbearable. On the streets, girls typically have two options in order to survive. You either sell yourself or you acquire items to sell, also known as boosting. In my previous life, I had been an avid Nordstrom shopper, so I knew my high-end women's products. So, every drug dealer has a main girl and a few side girls. And I saw the opportunity. What a better way to keep all of your girlfriends happy than with makeup, perfume, and various high-end women's products. This was my hustle, which earned me the illustrious title of Ulta Thief on Washington's Most Wanted, capture number 805. Over the course of 4 years, I was booked into jail over 20 times. I was once arrested for stealing a pint of Haagen-Dazs coffee ice cream. They should have called me the ice cream bandit, as I was always known on the streets for having a bunch of Haagen-Dazs minis in my purse, and they were always stolen, of course. I recall that arresting officer. It was the first and probably the only time an officer had genuinely expressed concern for my well-being. He treated me like a human and not some strung-out junkie. I remember the entire conversation, but what I couldn't shake was when he asked me, "Do you want more out of life?" Through his kindness, his words had imprinted on me and a seed was planted. He still took me to jail, and that is where I spent my 40th birthday that year. Detoxing in jail is miserable, but what's worse is ending up in the hole on suicide watch. That's what happens when you climb over the rail and threaten to jump off the second tier at Pierce County Jail. That landed me in a cell, alone, and wearing the nice comfy turtle suit. Eventually I was released, but that wouldn't last long. So, 2 police officers walk into a Nordstrom rack. Now my response seemed typically perfectly logical at the time. I did what any addict with a pesky warrant and stolen merchandise would do. I dove into the nearest clothing rounder. A grown woman hiding in a clothing rack, like a toddler playing hide and go seek. Not a fun ride to jail. The officer had told me that they weren't even looking for me, and had I not dove into the clothing rounder, they would have never caught me. And if it wasn't for that pesky toddler coming in after me, they would have never even seen me. Hashtag tag you're it. During the next 4 years, I was on the street. I was court ordered to attend treatment multiple times. During one intake session, to say it went bad would be an understatement. I had walked in with a big blue rubber tie-off still on my arm, having just shot up in the parking lot. As soon as I got out of there, I reached an absolute new low. I was taken to a new drug dealer's house to get well. A teenager of about 16 answered the door, and he looked at me for a long time before finally saying, "You're Joe So Small, aren't you?" He was a kid from my baseball team I had coached years before. I had driven him to practice. He had played in my front yard and ate Otter Pops on my front porch. Addiction does not discriminate. It takes the young, it takes the old, and once it takes hold, escape from addiction is often elusive. However, I would like to say that just a few weeks ago, that young man completed treatment. I wasn't surprised that I ended up on Washington's Most Wanted. What surprised me was that the camera really does add 10 pounds and that horizontal stripes are not your friend. Living on the streets during this time was horrific. The constant fear and anxiety was exhausting. Word spread fast after my television debut. I was hearing the buzz. It was like being circled by sharks. Not only did I have the cops looking for me because of that pesky warrant, but I also had dealers, addicts, and so-called friends trying to kidnap me and collect me for the bounty. I was becoming increasingly paranoid and afraid for my safety. Eventually, I was turned in for the bounty. I had woken up to 4 police officers standing over me. I was hurt, angry, and lost. The epitome of hopelessness. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. I had overdosed many times, been in and out of jails and hospitals. I'd suffered endocarditis, an infection in my heart, and I should have been left an amputee because of an infection in my arm. But this was it. Escape no longer possible. I was desperate. I was rapidly losing my mind, my body, and my battle with addiction. Sun Tzu, The Art of War, desperate ground. Upon desperate ground, or as it were, sitting in a leaking boat or lying in a burning house, you will survive if you fight quickly and perish if you do not. On December 2nd, 2016, shortly after being released from jail, I moved to Bellingham with a duffel bag of clothes, 11 teeth in my head, and a ferocious attitude. I was in desperate need of help. I was ordered to attend intensive outpatient at Catholic Community Services as part of probation. This is where my recovery begins and I start to heal. I was pulled up from depths unimaginable. Despite my rough exterior, my counselor at CCS treated me with respect and dignity. I was shown empathy despite my hostility and given compassion in exchange for vulgarity. I was so broken. I am grateful for that counselor who provided me with the hope that I so desperately needed until I was able to find my inner light. A transformation began to occur as my recovery starts to grow roots. I found employment for the first time in years, but working at a gas station felt hopeless. I remember those words of that kind police officer years before. Do you want more out of life? Yes, I do. I wanted fulfillment, but I was apprehensive about everything, and I lacked confidence. During a one-on-one, it was my counselor who suggested that I would be a good fit for the substance use disorder professional program here at Whatcom Community College. Shortly thereafter, I had applied and was accepted as part of the first graduating cohort. I heard it said one time that the difference between who you are today and who you will be 5 years from now is the people you meet and the books you read. I'm not the same person that I was in my addiction. I am grateful for the opportunities that I've had to learn, to grow, to be challenged, and to be encouraged. One of the greatest encouragements I have ever been given was when Lex, one of my program instructors, told me to follow my passion and not to let anyone dim my light. Today, my passion is to become a public speaker. My heart's desire is to shine light on the disease of addiction, to bring addiction up out of the darkness. The famous French poet and novelist Victor Hugo once said, "He who opens a school door closes a prison." I didn't know what I wanted when I went back to school, but I knew what I didn't want, and I had motivation. Being labeled a drug addict has always been a huge barrier for me. Coupled with being on Washington's Most Wanted, it was devastating. I'm not embarrassed about my story anymore, and I do not regret the past. Now, I get the opportunity to share my experience and hopefully inspire others. Today, my children call me. They tell me that they're proud of me and that they love me. I have been given a second chance of life.
Thank you, Whatcom Community College, for opening your doors for me. Many ask, why is the turtle up on top of the fence post? My answer is this, because this is where she is happiest. In June, I graduate from the Substance Use Disorder Professional Program with a 4.0 GPA. I am pursuing a public speaking career to share my story and to provide hope to others. I currently have several speaking engagements on the calendar, and in a few weeks, the Governor of Washington, Jay Inslee, will be presenting me with the ACT Transforming Lives Award. This is transformation, and I love my life today. Thank you very much.